In Astra Malorum, we learn the ties between so many things. Both new characters, Dr. Threston, old ones with Josiah Shem, even playable characters with Dempsey, and how it's all connected by Liberty Falls. I know, a bit random, but I think you guys are going to like this one. And as always, when it comes to story videos, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, theories, and opinions on everything down in the comment section below. Even if I don't reply, I read through all of those comments. But hey, if you're already doing that, I appreciate if you guys could support the channel by dropping a like and subscribe. But with that said, let's talk about the story of Astra Malorum and Liberty Falls. Now, where this whole conversation even starts from is actually the conversational quotes from the map. If you guys haven't heard them, I'll have them linked on screen now. They're amazing, a lot of great story information. And initially, I heard this in the conversation between Dempsey and Gray, but also in the solo quotes for Dempsey, he talks about this too. I want to play that just because he gets down to the point faster.
Folks back home used to talk about an observatory that disappeared from Liberty Falls in the 20s. This couldn't be it. Could it? If this place and the Van Dorn farm ended up here, what the living fuck is wrong with my hometown? I mean, any place that gave the world Tank Dempsey can't be all bad.
So already from that alone, we hear so much. We hear that this planetarium that we're playing on in Astra Malorum was once from Liberty Falls, and that Dempsey was also from Liberty Falls, and that has so much consequences for things that we're going to get into this video. And as much as I want to start off with the Dempsey side of this, I think it's much more important to talk about this planetarium and how it was originally from Liberty Falls too. Now, to understand this planetarium, you have to understand who it was built by. Now, already from the quote that we heard from Dempsey is that it was in Liberty Falls, but disappeared in the 20s. And to understand why that happened, you have to understand the story of Dr. Threston. This is the brain we interact with inside the Easter egg of this game, and we'll get to that, but you have to understand what he was influenced by, because he just didn't come up with all this stuff himself. Instead, he was influenced by none other than Josiah Shem. And his story actually goes back to Black Ops 6 zombies, and specifically Shattered Veil. But what we learned from Josiah Shem is that he's actually from a long time ago in the 1700s, late 1700s to be more specific, and when he is there, he originally is from the Order from the Chaos story. This is why we see him with those garments. But he actually steps away from that order and starts his own cult because he was hearing a voice talk to him from beyond. And of course, he gathers followers based on this. And what the voice tells him is that he needs to go to what we now know as Liberty Falls. Now, at the time, there was native people living there, and he unfortunately forces them out. And this is where the founding of the map Liberty Falls comes from. Him and his original cult followers are the ones that built it up. But the first thing they've built was none other than the mansion. The same mansion that we play on in Shattered Veil. That was built by Josiah Shem and his cult. And the reason why they built it here is because they were listening to the voice from the Dark Ether, and that in this spot there was something valuable here. And we later learned below the map that the native people who were living there before actually had connections to something of the Dark Ether. In fact, this is where we see a statue of the Modern Warfare worm, which is kind of random, but that's what it ties it to that. And that's what the voice from the Dark Ether wanted. And this is where we finally learn what the motives of Josiah Shem and his cult are, because what he says and what the voice has been telling him is that if you do what he tells them to, he will grant them eternal life. And this is when they build up Liberty Falls, the mansion, and eventually start the ritual after 30 years of building up Liberty Falls. And when they start this ritual, they are finally introduced to the voice from the Dark Ether that's been talking to them. And who that voice was none other than Cortifex, a Dark Ether entity and once ruler of the Dark Ether, and also from the Vanguard zombie story. Now, if you know anything about him and that story, you would know that he's not a good guy. In fact, he's someone you shouldn't be trusting. And unfortunately, Josiah Shem and his followers made the mistake of not only trusting him, but welcoming him through their rituals. And to no one's surprise, Cortifex does not actually grant them eternal life, and instead slaughters them all. Now, it's not clear why Cortifex did this, if it was just for fun or he's setting up something for later that we never saw the results of, but it's unfortunately what happened. And this all took place in the late 1700s to early 1800s. But sometime later on, in the early 1900s, Dr. Threston learns about this. Now, unlike Dr. Threston, he isn't a part of the Order. Instead, he's a doctor, a scientist even. But even so, he becomes an admirer of Shem and his work. And this really comes from because he also starts hearing a voice telling him to go back to Liberty Falls, the same place that Shem did. And when he's here, he also gathers followers and starts collecting artifacts that are tied to both Liberty Falls and Shem. This is why we see Shem's dagger in one of the showcase at the planetarium, because he wanted to collect that. Now, unlike when Shem was here, obviously there was already a town Liberty Falls built, and he, instead of going to the mansion, he builds his own thing. And this is the same planetarium. That's what Threston and his followers end up doing. They build this planetarium. And it's interesting because unlike how with Shem things were more magical, Dr. Threston is a doctor, more of a man of science. Even though he's an admirer of Shem, he sees what happened to Shem and his followers was a necessary sacrifice. That's what the voice tells him, is that sure, they died, but that was a necessary sacrifice for our ascension. And what does their ascension mean? I mean, I'm not even sure if Dr. Threston knew, because all he knows is that then he starts learning about other civilizations and how there was Martians living on Mars hundreds of thousands of years before humanity ever did. And does that mean that he thought their ascension was going to Mars? Honestly, probably. That's probably what it was. But regardless, when he finally does this, he actually starts a showcase at his museum, collecting all the artifacts that he does. And when he does this, this is when what happens to his planetarium from Dempsey's quote happens, where this entire planetarium in the early 20s just gets puffed away. And what we learn is that it just didn't get puffed away to anywhere, but instead was brought down to the dark ether. And we learned this from a radio in Astra Malorum, but when they get here, Dr. Threston and his followers are greeted to the voice that's been talking to him this whole time. And that voice was not Cortifex like it was for Shem, but instead now, the Warden. And we already know what the Warden does. He looks for souls of value, souls that have been touched by something powerful, and he takes them. And the things that has touched all these people was obviously all the things that he collected, including Shem's dagger. And of course, after feasting on all their souls, all of them end up dying, outside of Dr. Threston, who actually puts himself in a cryo-freeze chamber, which we'll actually use during the Easter egg, which is kind of something. And that explains how this planetarium that was once in Liberty Falls ended up on this asteroid in the rings of Saturn. It was brought here by the Warden. And that's the ties to Liberty Falls, this planetarium, and Astra Malorum. But there's still the Dempsey side of this, because we also learned that Dempsey was also from Liberty Falls. Now keep in mind, obviously he wasn't alive for when Shem did all his things, and he wasn't even alive for Dr. Threston, because Dr. Threston, this all happened in the 20s, but even what you could tell from Dempsey, he wasn't around back then. And as we could hear from the quote when he talks about this, he's talking about something from the past that he wasn't around for, and also the fact that he's a soldier in Vietnam, which happens in the 60s. That's a long ways away from the 20s, so he most likely was not even around for that. But this is important to point out, that this is Dempsey's hometown, that this is Liberty Falls, because keep in mind, Dempsey is from an alternate universe. He's not from the same universe that we were playing on. He's not from the Liberty Falls we know, the Shattered Veil and Reckoning that we know. He's from a different Liberty Falls entirely, from a different timeline. And you can't help but question, why? Why does it keep popping up again? Why is it Liberty Falls over and over again? Even in the conversations between Dempsey and Gray, she questions this too. Why does Liberty Falls pop up again? Why is it in two different universes? And why is it valuable in both of them? Why has something happened there? And I think we may have actually got at least a hint on why it might have been so powerful. And it's from this here.
These minerals from Shem's holy ground are rich with otherworldly substances. Shem maintained that the site where he built his mansion came to him in a dream. Perhaps it was a projection from the same realm that birthed these stones.
Here we hear Dr. Threston talking about that he speculates that these rocks here are the reason why Josiah Shem found this place valuable, because of their power. And I mean, if we look at these rocks, I mean, we've seen these before. If we're not mistaken, this is 115. And if they have been at Liberty Falls, it would finally make sense why Cortifex and even the Warden want people to go here, because that ties it to the Dark Ether. These asteroids of 115 are here. And as much as that would explain why these Dark Ether entities find this place so valuable to them, it doesn't explain how they got there. Because last we checked, Nikolai banished all 115 into the Dark Ether. So how did it end up in Liberty Falls? And honestly, I just don't have an answer for that. And I really want to find out because this is fascinating. This radio alone is one of the most underrated ones in the map, and it's something that we need to focus on. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, theories, and opinions on what's going on with Liberty Falls and why it's so important, and more importantly, why there was 115 there. Regardless though, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I want to thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.